The woman's hands were caked with dirt beneath her fingernails, the Oklahoma sun beating down mercilessly as she knelt before a simple wooden cross that marked the grave of her husband. And she had been coming here every single day for 6 months without fail. Prudence Reynolds brushed away the dried leaves that had gathered overnight on the mound of earth. Her calico dress, stained with dust and grass from countless hours, spent in this lonely corner of the cemetery outside Fort Gibson. She was 24 years old, though grief had carved lines around her eyes that made her look older. Her auburn hair, once carefully pinned, now hung in a loose braid down her back. She carried a tin bucket filled with wildflowers she had picked along the creek on her walk from town, the same walk she made every morning before the sun grew too hot. "Good morning, Thomas," she whispered, arranging the flowers against the cross. Her voice cracked slightly, the way it always did when she spoke to him. "The Hendersons' cow had twin calves last night. You would have liked to see them." She settled onto the ground, not caring about the dirt anymore. Those concerns had died with Thomas 6 months ago when his horse had thrown him during a storm. He had broken his neck, the doctor said. It was quick. That was supposed to be a comfort, but Prudence found no comfort in anything these days. She just came here, day after day, tending the grave as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. The cemetery sat on a small hill overlooking the Arkansas River, surrounded by scrub oak and prairie grass that whispered in the constant wind. Fort Gibson itself was a growing town in this year of 1875, with the military post bringing commerce and protection to the Indian Territory. But Prudence barely noticed the town's expansion. Her world had shrunk to this plot of land, this grave, these daily conversations with a man who could not answer. She was pulling weeds from around the base of the cross when she heard the jingle of spurs behind her. Prudence did not turn around. People occasionally passed through the cemetery, and she had learned to ignore them. But the footsteps stopped close by, and she felt the presence of someone standing there, watching. "You here every day?" a man's voice asked. It was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone from farther south, maybe Texas. Prudence's hands stilled in the dirt. "Yes," she said simply, not looking up. "That your husband?" "Yes." There was a pause, and she heard the man shift his weight. "That is a lonely thing," he said quietly. "Coming here alone every day." Something in his tone made her finally glance over her shoulder. The man was tall, lean in the way of someone who spent long days in the saddle. He wore dusty brown trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a battered hat that shaded his face. But she could see his eyes, which were a surprising clear gray, and they held genuine sympathy rather than the pity she had grown to hate. "I am managing," Prudence said, turning back to the grave. "I am sure you are," the man replied. He did not move away. After another moment, he crouched down a few feet from her, his spurs clinking softly. "Name is Lucas Jameson. I just hired on at the Pritchard Ranch, driving cattle up from Texas." Prudence did not respond. She did not want to be rude, but she also did not want company. This time with Thomas was private, sacred in its own way. Lucas seemed to understand. He did not press for conversation. Instead, he simply remained there, quiet and still. After a few minutes, he stood and tipped his hat, even though she was not looking at him. "Madam," he said softly, and then his footsteps retreated across the cemetery. Prudence exhaled slowly. She finished pulling the weeds, arranged the flowers more carefully, and then sat back on her heels. "Someone spoke to me today," she told Thomas. "A cowboy. Lucas Jameson. He seemed kind, I suppose." The wind rustled through the oak trees and a crow called from somewhere nearby. Prudence stayed until the sun climbed higher, until the heat became oppressive, and then she gathered her bucket and walked the long mile back into town. back to the boarding house where she rented a small room, back to the seamstress shop where she worked to earn her keep. The next morning she returned to the grave with fresh flowers, and Lucas Jameson was already there. He stood beside Thomas's grave, his hat in his hands, his head slightly bowed as if in prayer. Prudence stopped on the path, surprised. Lucas must have heard her approach because he looked up and gave her a small nod. "Morning, madam," he said. He stepped back from the grave. "I hope you do not mind. I said a prayer for him, for your husband." Prudence blinked. "Why?" Lucas shrugged, his expression gentle. "Seemed like he might appreciate it, and you looked like you could use someone else remembering him too." Something tight in Prudence's chest loosened just a fraction. She walked forward slowly and knelt in her usual spot. Lucas moved away, giving her space, but he did not leave. He walked to a nearby oak tree and leaned against it, looking out over the river valley below. Prudence went through her routine, changing out yesterday's wilted flowers for fresh ones, checking the cross to make sure it was still secure in the ground. The August heat was already building and sweat trickled down her spine beneath her dress. When she finished, she sat back and looked over at Lucas. "You do not have to stay," she said. "I know." He pushed away from the tree and walked closer, but not too close. He had a quiet, respectful way about him that Prudence appreciated. "But I was thinking, madam, that maybe you should not be alone out here all the time. It is not entirely safe. There are still raiders passing through, even with the fort nearby." Prudence frowned. "I've been coming here every day for 6 months. Nothing has happened." "Luck," Lucas said simply. "But luck runs out. Are you trying to frighten me?" "No, madam, I am trying to help." He held her gaze steadily. "You are not alone anymore. If you want, I will come here with you. Keep watch while you tend the grave. Make sure you are safe." Prudence stared at him, taken aback. "You do not even know me." "I know grief," Lucas said quietly. "And I know what it is like to feel like you are drowning in it. I lost my whole family to fever when I was 19. My parents, my 2 younger sisters. I understand that need to hold on to them, even after they are gone." His words hung in the humid morning air. Prudence felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She had cried so much in the first months after Thomas died that she thought she had no tears left, but apparently she was wrong. "I do not need charity," she said, her voice rough. "It is not charity." Lucas settled onto the ground, a respectful distance away. "It is just one person understanding another. That is all." They sat in silence for a long time. Prudence talked quietly to Thomas, telling him about her work at the seamstress shop, about the gossip she had heard in town. Lucas did not interrupt or make her feel self-conscious. He simply sat under the oak tree, keeping his quiet vigil. When Prudence finally rose to leave, Lucas stood as well. "I will walk you back to town," he said. It was not a question, but it was not a demand either. Prudence found herself nodding. They walked together down the dusty road, the morning sun climbing higher, cicadas beginning their endless summer song. Lucas did not try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. He simply walked beside her, his long stride slowed to match her pace. At the edge of town, where the buildings began to cluster together, Prudence stopped. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for your kindness." Lucas tipped his hat. "I will be at the cemetery tomorrow morning if that is all right with you." Prudence hesitated, then nodded once. She watched him turn and head toward the Pritchard ranch on the outskirts of town, his figure growing smaller in the shimmering heat. Then she walked to the boarding house, climbed the stairs to her room and sat on her bed, staring at her work-worn hands. For the first time in 6 months, she felt something other than the hollow ache of loss. It was small, barely there, but it felt almost like hope. True to his word, Lucas was at the cemetery the next morning and the morning after that. He developed a routine of his own, arriving just before Prudence and sitting under the oak tree while she tended Thomas's grave. Sometimes he would tell her stories about his work at the ranch, about the cattle and horses, about the other ranch hands. His voice was soothing, a low rumble that made the cemetery feel less lonely. Prudence found herself beginning to talk to him as well, not just to Thomas. She told him about her work, about the difficult customers at the seamstress shop, about her life before Thomas died. Lucas listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he truly cared about her answers. A week passed, then two. The summer heat bore down relentlessly, and one morning Prudence arrived at the cemetery to find Lucas already there with a canvas tarp he had rigged up between two trees, creating a patch of shade. "Thought you might appreciate getting out of the sun," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice as if worried he had overstepped. Prudence looked at the makeshift shelter, then at Lucas. "That was thoughtful," she said softly. "Thank you." They sat in the shade that day, and Prudence realized she was actually grateful for his presence. The cemetery did not feel quite so much like a place of death when Lucas was there. It felt more like a place of remembrance, of honoring the past while still being part of the living world. One morning in late August, as they sat together under the tarp, Lucas asked, "Will you tell me about him?" "About Thomas?" Prudence stiffened slightly. No one had really asked her that before. People in town avoided mentioning Thomas as if speaking his name would cause her more pain. But Lucas was looking at her with such open, honest curiosity that she found herself answering. "We met when I was 18, she began slowly. "He was a clerk at the general store. I came in to buy thread for my mother, and he spent 20 minutes helping me find exactly the right color." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "He was patient, kind. He never raised his voice, never lost his temper. We courted for 2 years before we married." "He sounds like a good man," Lucas said. "He was." Prudence plucked at the grass beside her. "We were married for 4 years. We wanted children, but it never happened. And then he died, and I just felt so lost. Coming here every day, it was the only thing that made sense." Lucas was quiet for a moment, then said, "My pa used to say that the dead would want us to keep living, to honor them by not giving up on life." "That is easier said than done." "I know." He met her eyes. "But I think you are stronger than you realize, Prudence." It was the first time he had used her given name. She had told him to call her Prudence weeks ago, but he had continued with Madam out of respect. Hearing her name in his deep, gentle voice sent a small shiver through her. "I do not feel strong," she admitted. "Strength is not about feeling strong," Lucas said. "It is about getting up every day and facing the world even when it hurts. You do that, every single day." Prudence felt tears well up again, but this time they were different. They were not entirely tears of grief. There was something else mixed in, something that felt almost like gratitude. As summer began to fade into early autumn, Prudence noticed changes in herself. She still came to the cemetery every day, but the visits grew slightly shorter. She found herself looking forward to her conversations with Lucas, to his quiet presence and steady companionship. He made her laugh sometimes, with his dry observations about life on the ranch, and the sound of her own laughter startled her. She had not laughed since Thomas died. One September morning, after a night of rain had left the world clean and fresh, Prudence arrived at the cemetery to find Lucas standing beside Thomas's grave with a new wooden cross in his hands. This one was carefully carved and sanded smooth, with Thomas's name and dates etched into the wood. "The old one was starting to rot," Lucas explained quietly. "I hope you do not mind. I made this one from oak. It will last longer." Prudence stared at the cross, overwhelmed. Lucas had spent hours on this, she could tell. The craftsmanship was beautiful, the letters perfectly formed. "Lucas, "I cannot pay you for this," she said, her voice catching. "I am not asking for payment." He set the cross down gently. "Let me put it in place." She watched as he carefully removed the old cross and installed the new one, making sure it was deep in the ground and would not shift. When he finished, he stepped back, and Prudence moved forward to trace the carved letters with her fingertips. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." Lucas nodded, and for a moment their eyes met and held. Prudence felt something pass between them, something she was not quite ready to name but could no longer deny. Her heart, which had felt dead for so long, was beginning to beat again. But with that realization came guilt. How could she feel anything for another man when Thomas had only been gone 6 months? What kind of wife did that make her? As if sensing her turmoil, Lucas said gently, "There is no timeline for grief, Prudence, and there is no betrayal in continuing to live." "How did you know what I was thinking?" she asked. "Because I went through the same thing." He sat down under the oak tree, and after a hesitation, she joined him. "About a year after my family died, I met a woman in San Antonio. She was kind, pretty, and she seemed to genuinely care about me. But I felt so guilty for even noticing her, for thinking about anything other than my loss. I pushed her away." "Do you regret it?" Lucas nodded slowly. "I do. Because I realized later that my family would not have wanted me to be alone forever. They would have wanted me to find happiness again. And I think your Thomas would want the same for you." Prudence looked at the grave, at the beautiful new cross Lucas had made. "I miss him," she said quietly. "I know. And you always will in some way, but missing him does not mean you have to stop living." They sat together in silence, watching the morning sunlight filter through the oak leaves. Prudence felt the weight of guilt begin to ease just slightly. Lucas was right. Thomas had been a kind, generous man. He would not want her to spend the rest of her life in mourning. That afternoon, instead of going straight back to her room at the boarding house, Prudence stopped by the general store and bought fresh fabric. She had been wearing the same few dresses for months, not caring about her appearance. But suddenly she wanted something new, something that was not associated with grief and loss. She spent the next few evenings sewing a new dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. When she wore it to the cemetery the following week, she saw Lucas notice. His eyes widened slightly and a slow smile spread across his face. "That is a beautiful dress," he said. Prudence felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you, I made it myself." "You are talented." He offered his arm. "Would you like to walk down to the river after you finish here?" The cottonwoods should be turning gold by now. It was the first time Lucas had suggested doing anything beyond their cemetery routine. Prudence's heart beat faster. She knew that accepting would be a step forward, a movement away from the past and toward something new. It terrified her. But it also felt right. "I would like that," she said. After tending Thomas's grave, telling him quietly about her week, Prudence accepted Lucas's arm and they walked down the hill toward the Arkansas River. The cottonwoods were indeed turning, their leaves a brilliant gold against the blue autumn sky. The air smelled of dried grass and distant wood smoke. They walked along the riverbank, not talking much, just enjoying the peaceful afternoon. Lucas pointed out a pair of hawks circling high above, and Prudence found herself smiling as she watched them dance on the wind currents. "I have been thinking," Lucas said after a while. "The Pritchard Ranch is looking to hire someone to help with mending and sewing. The ranch hands are always tearing their clothes, and Mrs. Pritchard is getting too old to keep up with it all. I mentioned you, and she said she would like to meet you." Prudence stopped walking. "You told her about me." "I told her I knew a talented seamstress who might be interested in the work," Lucas said carefully. "It would pay better than the shop in town, and you would have your own cabin on the ranch property, if you wanted it." The implications hung in the air between them. A cabin on the ranch would mean living near Lucas. It would mean leaving town, leaving the cemetery, leaving her daily vigil at Thomas's grave. "I do not know," Prudence said slowly. "I need to think about it." "Of course." Lucas started walking again, and she fell into step beside him. "I am not trying to rush you, Prudence. I just thought you should know about the opportunity." They walked back to town as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. At the boarding house, Lucas tipped his hat to her. "Will I see you tomorrow morning?" he asked. "Yes," Prudence said. "I will be there." But that night, lying in her narrow bed, Prudence stared at the ceiling and thought about Lucas's offer. Part of her wanted to accept immediately. The work would be better, the pay would be better, and she would be near Lucas. She could no longer deny that she had developed feelings for him, that his presence had become as essential to her as breathing. But another part of her felt like accepting would mean abandoning Thomas. If she moved to the ranch, she would not be able to visit his grave every day. She would be starting a new life, one that did not revolve around her loss. Was she ready for that? The next morning, she walked to the cemetery as usual, her mind still churning. Lucas was there, and he smiled when he saw her, but he did not press her about the job. They fell into their comfortable routine, and Prudence knelt beside Thomas's grave. "I do not know what to do," she whispered to the grave. "Lucas offered me a job at the ranch where he works. It would be a good opportunity, but it would mean leaving you. Not every day, but I could not come here like I do now." The wind rustled through the grass, and a mourning dove called from somewhere in the trees. Prudence closed her eyes. "I think I am falling in love with him, Thomas, and I feel so guilty about that. You have only been gone 6 months. But Lucas is kind and patient, and he makes me feel like maybe I can have a future again." She sat in silence for a long time, and slowly, a sense of peace settled over her. Thomas had loved her. He had wanted her to be happy. And somehow, she knew that he would not want her to spend the rest of her life alone, bound to his grave. Prudence opened her eyes and looked over at Lucas, who was sitting under the oak tree, whittling a piece of wood. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and their eyes met. "I would like to meet Mrs. Pritchard," Prudence said. "About the job." Lucas's face lit up with a smile so bright it made her heart skip. "Really, really." He stood and walked over to her, stopping a respectful distance away. "That makes me very happy, Prudence." "Me too," she admitted. "I am scared, but I am also ready, I think." "Being scared is all right," Lucas said gently. "I will be right there with you, every step." That afternoon, Lucas took her to the Pritchard Ranch. It was a sprawling property about 3 miles outside of Fort Gibson, with a large main house, several barns, and a handful of small cabins for the ranch hands. Mrs. Pritchard was a stout woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, but her smile was warm when Lucas introduced Prudence. "Lucas tells me you are a fine seamstress," Mrs. Pritchard said, leading them into the main house. "I have been sewing since I was a child," Prudence replied. "My mother was a seamstress, and she taught me everything she knew." Mrs. Pritchard showed her a pile of torn shirts and trousers. "The men are hard on their clothes. I need someone who can mend these and also make new items when needed. The pay is $15 a month, plus room and board in one of the cabins." $15 was significantly more than Prudence was making at the shop in town. "That is very generous," she said. "You would be earning it, trust me." Mrs. Pritchard fixed her with a direct look. "Lucas also told me about your situation, about your husband. I am sorry for your loss, dear." Prudence nodded, throat tight. "Thank you. If you take this job, you would still be free to go into town whenever you like," Mrs. Pritchard continued. "We are not keeping you prisoner here. You can visit your husband's grave as often as you need." The kindness in the older woman's voice made Prudence's eyes sting. "I appreciate that. So will you take the position?" Prudence looked at Lucas, who was standing quietly by the door, his expression hopeful but not pressuring. She thought about her small, lonely room at the boarding house, about her daily walks to the cemetery, about the way her life had become so small and bounded by grief. "Yes," she said, "I will take it." Mrs. Pritchard smiled broadly. "Wonderful. When can you start?" "Give me a week to finish my obligations in town and gather my things." "Perfect. Lucas, show her the cabin she will be staying in." Lucas led Prudence outside and across the ranch yard to a small cabin set slightly apart from the others. It was simple but clean, with a main room that held a table and 2 chairs, a wood stove for heating and cooking, and a separate bedroom with a real bed frame. "It is not much," Lucas said, "but it is yours. Private." Prudence walked through the space, running her hand along the table. "It is perfect," she said honestly. "Much nicer than my room at the boarding house." Lucas smiled. "My cabin is just over there," he said, pointing to another small structure about 50 yards away. "So if you ever need anything, I am close by. Close, but not too close. Respectful of propriety." Prudence appreciated that about Lucas. He never pushed, never assumed, never made her uncomfortable. Over the next week, Prudence wrapped up her work at the seamstress shop and packed her meager belongings. She visited the cemetery every day, spending extra time at Thomas's grave, preparing herself for the change that was coming. "I am not abandoning you," she told him on her last full day before moving to the ranch. "I will still visit, maybe not every day but regularly. And I will always love you, Thomas, but I have to keep living. I have to move forward." The wind whispered through the oak trees, and a single golden leaf drifted down to land on the grave. Prudence picked it up and tucked it into her pocket, a small token to take with her. Lucas helped her move her belongings to the ranch, loading her trunk and boxes onto a wagon and driving her out personally. As they rode away from town, Prudence looked back at the cemetery on the hill, at the small cluster of graves visible in the distance. She felt a pang of loss, but also something that felt like relief. The cabin was ready for her when they arrived, with fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in a jar on the table. Prudence looked at Lucas questioningly. "Mrs. Pritchard wanted you to feel welcome," he said, but the slight flush on his cheeks suggested he might have had something to do with it as well. Prudence settled into life on the ranch more easily than she had expected. The work was steady and satisfying, mending torn clothes and sewing new shirts and trousers for the ranch hands. Mrs. Pritchard was a fair employer, and the other workers treated her with respect. She had her own space, her own routine, and slowly, the constant ache of grief began to fade into something more manageable. True to her word, she visited Thomas's grave twice a week, usually on Sunday mornings and Wednesday afternoons. Lucas always offered to accompany her, and she always accepted. Their walks to and from the cemetery became cherished times, opportunities to talk and share their thoughts. As autumn deepened into winter, Prudence found herself growing closer to Lucas. He was patient and kind, never rushing her, always respecting her boundaries. But there was no denying the attraction building between them, the way their hands would brush accidentally and linger, the way their eyes would meet and hold for just a moment too long. One cold November morning, as they stood together at Thomas's grave, Prudence said quietly, "I think Thomas would have liked you." Lucas looked surprised. "Really, really. You are both kind men, good men." She turned to face him fully. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything you have done for me. For being there when I needed someone, even when I did not realize I needed someone." "You do not have to thank me, Prudence." His gray eyes were soft, Being with you, getting to know you, it has been a privilege." They stood close together, their breath misting in the cold air, and Prudence felt her heart race. Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I care about you," he said quietly. "Very much." "I care about you too," Prudence whispered. Lucas smiled, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But instead he simply took her hand and squeezed it gently. "We have all the time in the world," he said. "No rush." As winter settled over Oklahoma, Prudence found herself happier than she had been in a long time. She enjoyed her work, she had a comfortable home, and she had Lucas. They spent their evenings together sometimes, sitting by the fire in one cabin or the other, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas taught her to play checkers, and she read to him from the books she borrowed from Mrs. Pritchard's extensive library. The other ranch hands noticed, of course. There was good-natured teasing, but it was gentle and never cruel. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to see Lucas and Prudence finding comfort in each other's company. Christmas came, and Mrs. Pritchard hosted a big dinner for all the ranch workers. Prudence found herself laughing and enjoying the company, feeling part of a community in a way she had not since Thomas died. Lucas gave her a beautiful shawl he had bought in town, a soft wool in a deep forest green. She gave him a new shirt she had sewn, perfectly fitted to his tall frame. "It is perfect," he said, his eyes warm. "Thank you." That night, as Lucas walked her back to her cabin under a sky brilliant with stars, he stopped outside her door. "Prudence," he said softly, "I know it has only been 8 months since Thomas passed. I know you might not be ready. But I need you to know how I feel." Prudence's heart pounded. "Lucas." "I love you," he said simply. "I am in love with you. I have been for months now, and I am not asking for anything in return, not yet. I just needed you to know." Prudence looked up at him, at this good, kind man who had appeared in her life at her lowest moment and had shown her that she could survive, that she could even be happy again. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easier than she expected. "I think I have loved you for a while now." Lucas's face broke into a radiant smile. "Really, really." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw. "I was so afraid of these feelings at first. I felt guilty for having them, but Thomas would not want me to be alone forever. And you, Lucas, you make me feel alive again." Lucas covered her hand with his own, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Yes." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Prudence did not want to change her mind. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, a kiss full of promise and hope. Prudence felt warmth spread through her entire body, a feeling she thought she would never experience again. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I will never hurt you," he promised. "I will spend every day making sure you are happy and safe." "I know," Prudence whispered. "I trust you." They stood together in the cold winter night, holding each other, and Prudence felt the last heavy chains of grief fall away. She would always love Thomas, would always carry a piece of him in her heart. But she was ready now to embrace the future, to build a new life with Lucas. The winter passed, and spring arrived with its promise of renewal. Prudence and Lucas's courtship continued, growing deeper and more intimate as the months went by. They were the subject of much happy speculation among the ranch workers, and even Mrs. Pritchard gave them knowing looks and smiles. In April, a full year after Thomas's death, Prudence visited his grave on the anniversary. Lucas came with her, standing respectfully back while she knelt and placed fresh flowers on the grave. "It has been a year," she said softly to Thomas. "A year since you left. It has been the hardest year of my life, but I am still here. I am still standing. and I have found someone who makes me happy again. I hope you understand. I hope you approve." She sat in silence for a long time, remembering Thomas, honoring his memory. Then she stood and walked to where Lucas waited. "Ready?" he asked gently. "Ready?" As they walked back to the ranch, Lucas said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I want to marry you, Prudence. I want you to be my wife. But I wanted to make sure you were truly ready, that you had time to properly grieve Thomas." Prudence felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Are you asking me?" Lucas dropped to one knee right there on the dusty road, taking her hand in his. "Prudence Reynolds, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Prudence said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Prudence felt joy burst through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. They were married in late May, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Gibson. Mrs. Pritchard stood up for Prudence, and one of the other ranch hands stood up for Lucas. The ceremony was small and intimate, just a handful of friends and fellow ranch workers, but it was perfect. Prudence wore a new dress she had sewn herself, a cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Lucas wore his best suit, his hair freshly cut, his eyes shining with love as he watched her walk down the aisle toward him. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Lucas kissed her gently, and the small congregation cheered. Prudence felt her heart overflow with happiness. She had not thought she would ever feel this way again, had not believed it was possible to find love after such devastating loss. But here she was, married to a wonderful man, surrounded by people who cared about her, with a whole future stretching out before them. Mrs. Pritchard had prepared a wedding dinner at the ranch, and everyone ate and drank and celebrated late into the evening. As the sun set, Lucas took Prudence's hand and led her away from the festivities, back to the cabin they would now share together. He had moved his belongings into her cabin over the past few days, combining their two small households into one. It was cozy and warm, filled with both of their possessions, and it felt like home. "Are you happy?" Lucas asked, pulling her close. "So happy," Prudence said, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I never thought I could feel this way again." "You deserve all the happiness in the world," Lucas said, kissing the top of her head. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Prudence sent a silent thank you to Thomas. He had given her 4 wonderful years, had taught her what love could be. And because of that foundation, she had been able to recognize love when it appeared again in the form of Lucas Jameson, a kind cowboy who had joined her at a grave and told her she was not alone anymore. The seasons turned, and Prudence and Lucas built a life together at the Pritchard Ranch. They worked hard, saved their money, and dreamed of someday having their own small spread. Lucas was patient and loving, always considerate of Prudence's needs and feelings. And Prudence found that she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for, capable of weathering hardship and finding joy on the other side. She still visited Thomas's grave occasionally, though not with the desperate regularity of those first months. She would bring flowers and talk to him a bit, telling him about her life, about Lucas, about how she was doing. And she always felt a sense of peace there, as if Thomas was telling her that he was proud of her for moving forward, for choosing to live fully. In the spring of 1877, 2 years after they first met in the cemetery, Prudence discovered she was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening after dinner, barely able to contain her excitement and nervousness. Lucas stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that probably startled every horse on the ranch. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby," Prudence confirmed, her own laughter bubbling up. Lucas set her down carefully as if she were suddenly made of glass. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to sit down? Should I get the doctor?" Prudence laughed at his sudden anxiousness. "I am fine, Lucas. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am strong, and everything is going to be all right." But Lucas fussed over her for the entire pregnancy, making sure she did not work too hard, bringing her special treats from town, building a beautiful cradle with his own hands. Prudence found his concern endearing, even when it became a bit overbearing. Mrs. Pritchard was delighted by the news and immediately began knitting baby clothes. The other ranch workers offered their congratulations, and everyone seemed excited about the new addition to their little community. As Prudence's belly grew, she felt a contentment she had not known was possible. She would place Lucas's hand on her stomach so he could feel the baby kick, and they would spend hours talking about what kind of parents they wanted to be, what they hoped for their child. In November, as winter was beginning to settle in once again, Prudence went into labor. The midwife from town was summoned, and after a long night and most of the next day, Prudence delivered a healthy baby boy. Lucas was beside himself with joy when the midwife led him into the room to meet his son. He approached the bed cautiously, his eyes wide with wonder as he looked at the tiny bundle in Prudence's arms. "He is perfect," Lucas breathed. "Absolutely perfect. Do you want to hold him?" Prudence asked. Lucas nodded, and she carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Lucas looked down at his son with such pure love that Prudence felt tears stream down her face. "What should we name him?" Lucas asked softly. Prudence had been thinking about this for months. "I was thinking Thomas," she said carefully. "After my first husband, if that does not bother you." Lucas looked up at her, his own eyes wet with tears. "That does not bother me at all. Thomas was a part of your life, a part of what made you who you are. It would be an honor to name our son after him." So Thomas Jameson came into the world, loved and wanted and cherished. He was a healthy, happy baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings, walking the floor with the baby when he fussed, staring at him for hours as if he could not quite believe this miracle existed. Prudence healed well from the birth, and soon she was back to working, though she scaled back her hours to care for young Thomas. Life settled into a new rhythm, one punctuated by baby cries and laughter, by the exhaustion of new parenthood, and the joy of watching their son grow and change. When spring came again, Prudence took baby Thomas to visit the grave of his namesake. She knelt in the grass, now holding a new life in her arms, and told the first Thomas about his family. "This is Thomas," she said softly, looking at the carved cross Lucas had made. "Your namesake. He is beautiful and healthy, and Lucas and I love him more than words can say. I wanted you to know that I have not forgotten you. I never will. You were my first love, and you will always have a place in my heart. But I have found happiness again, and I have a family. I hope that makes you happy wherever you are." Lucas stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, looking down at the grave with respect. "Thank you," he said quietly, as if speaking directly to Thomas. "Thank you for loving her first, for showing her what love should be. I promise I will take care of her and honor the memory of what you two had." They stood there for a few more minutes, the three of them together in the spring sunshine, and then they turned and walked back toward their life, toward their future. The years passed peacefully. The Pritchard Ranch prospered, and Lucas was eventually made foreman, a position that came with better pay and more responsibility. He handled it all with his characteristic steadiness and competence. Prudence continued her sewing work, and her skills became so well known that people from surrounding ranches would request her services specifically. In 1879, Prudence gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She was tiny and delicate, with Lucas's gray eyes and a temperament as sweet as her name suggested. Young Thomas, now almost 2, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. Life was full and busy and wonderfully chaotic. There were hard moments, of course. Times when money was tight, when the cattle prices fell, when illness swept through the ranch. But Lucas and Prudence faced everything together, their love and commitment to each other only growing stronger with each challenge they overcame. By 1882, they had saved enough money to buy a small parcel of land adjacent to the Pritchard Ranch. It was only 60 acres, but it was theirs. Lucas and some of the other ranch hands built a modest house, bigger than the cabin but not grand by any means. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room with a wide porch that looked out over rolling prairie. Moving into their own home felt like a dream come true. Prudence hung curtains she had sewn herself, arranged the furniture they had slowly accumulated, and planted a garden in the side yard. Lucas built a barn and bought a small herd of cattle to start their own operation, working the Pritchard Ranch during the day and tending to his own animals in the evenings and on Sundays. Thomas was now 5 years old, a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, wanting to learn about ranching and horses and cattle. Rose was 3, still her mother's shadow, helping Prudence in the garden and learning to sew simple stitches. One evening in late summer, after the children were asleep, Lucas and Prudence sat together on their porch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. "Can you believe how far we have come?" Prudence asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself," Lucas admitted. "I think about that day in the cemetery when I first saw you kneeling by Thomas's grave. You looked so lost, so alone, and now look at us. We have a home, land, beautiful children, we have everything." "We do," Prudence agreed. "And I owe so much of it to you, Lucas. You saved me when I did not even know I needed saving." Lucas turned to look at her, cupping her face in his calloused hands. "You saved yourself, Prudence. You had the strength to keep going, to heal, to love again. All I did was walk beside you." "You did more than that," she said. "You loved me when I was broken. You were patient when I needed time. You gave me a reason to believe in the future again." Lucas kissed her softly. "I love you, more than I could ever put into words. I love you too." They sat together as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Prudence thought about that woman she had been, kneeling alone at a grave day after day, trapped in her grief. She barely recognized that person now. Life had transformed her, had taught her that the human heart had an incredible capacity for healing and renewal. She still thought about Thomas sometimes, still missed him in quiet moments. But the sharp pain of his loss had softened into a gentle sadness, a tender remembrance of a good man and a happy time in her life. She could honor his memory while also fully embracing her present, and there was no conflict between those two things. In the spring of 1884, Prudence discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Lucas managed to contain his excitement to a more reasonable level, though he was still attentive and caring throughout her pregnancy. Their third child, another son, was born in October. They named him Henry after Lucas's father. With 3 children now, life became even more hectic. But there was so much love in their small house, so much laughter and joy. Thomas was now 7, already helping his father with ranch work in a serious way. Rose was 5, learning her letters and helping care for baby Henry. They were a family, strong and united, facing the challenges of frontier life together. One Sunday, in the fall of 1885, the family made the trip into Fort Gibson. Lucas had business at the general store, and Prudence wanted to visit Thomas's grave. She had not been in several months, life having been too busy, and she felt the pull to return. The cemetery looked much the same, though a few new graves had been added. Prudence walked to Thomas's plot, now holding baby Henry in her arms, with Lucas beside her and Thomas and Rose trailing behind. The oak cross Lucas had carved 10 years ago still stood strong, though weathered by the elements. Prudence knelt as best she could while holding the baby and placed fresh flowers at the base. "Hello, Thomas," she said softly. "I brought my family to see you. You have met young Thomas, of course. This is our daughter Rose and our baby son Henry. We are doing well, very well. I wanted you to know that." Young Thomas, now 8 years old, stepped forward. "Are you my mama's first husband?" he asked the grave with the honest curiosity of a child. "Yes, he was," Prudence said. "He was a good man and he loved me very much." "Papa said I was named after him," Thomas said. "That is right." The boy thought about this for a moment, then bent and placed his small hand on the grave. "Thank you for taking care of my mama before my papa could," he said solemnly. Prudence felt tears spring to her eyes at her son's simple, heartfelt words. Lucas's hand squeezed her shoulder gently. They stayed a few more minutes, and then the family walked back through the cemetery together, back to their wagon, back to their life. As they drove home, with the children chattering in the back and the Oklahoma prairie stretching endlessly around them, Prudence felt complete contentment. She had been through the valley of the shadow of death, had known grief so profound she thought it would destroy her. But she had survived. She had healed, and she had found love again, a deep and abiding love that had given her a family and a future. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Prudence and Lucas lay together in their bed, talking quietly about their plans for the ranch, about needing to expand the barn, about young Thomas starting proper school soon. "You remember what you said to me that first day in the cemetery?" Prudence asked suddenly. Lucas thought back. "I think I said several things. You said I was not alone anymore." "I did say that." Prudence turned to face him in the darkness. "You were right. I was not alone anymore from that day forward. You changed everything for me, Lucas." "We changed everything for each other," he corrected gently. "I was pretty lost myself before I met you, working from ranch to ranch, no real home, no real purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a reason to put down roots to build something lasting." "We built it together," Prudence said. "We did, and we are going to keep building for the rest of our lives." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, secure in their love and their commitment to each other. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The little ranch prospered gradually. Lucas proved to have an excellent eye for cattle, and their herd grew steadily. Prudence's sewing business expanded as well, and she began training Rose in the craft, passing down the skills her own mother had taught her. Thomas, their eldest, grew into a capable young man who loved ranch work as much as his father did. By the time he was 15, he was handling many of the ranch operations on his own. Rose was 12, a sweet girl with a talent for singing that delighted everyone who heard her. And Henry, now 6, was a bundle of energy and mischief who kept everyone on their toes. In 1891, Prudence and Lucas's ranch had grown to over 200 acres, with a substantial herd of cattle and a growing reputation for quality stock. They had built a larger house, adding more bedrooms and a proper dining room. They employed 2 ranch hands now, young men who lived in a bunkhouse Lucas had built. Life was good. Better than good. Prudence sometimes had to stop and look around at everything they had built. everything they had accomplished, and marvel at the journey that had brought them here. One evening in early autumn, as they celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary with a special dinner, Lucas raised his glass in a toast. "To my beautiful wife," he said, his voice warm with affection. 16 years ago, I married the strongest, most courageous woman I have ever known. You have given me 3 incredible children, a home, and a life beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Prudence felt tears gather in her eyes. "To my wonderful husband," she replied. "You came into my life when I needed you most, and you have been my rock, my partner, and my love ever since. Thank you for choosing me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me." The children cheered, and they all raised their glasses, toasting to family and love and the future. Later that night, when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, Prudence stood on the porch looking out at their land. The moon was full, bathing everything in silver light. She heard Lucas come up behind her, felt his arms wrap around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Just remembering," she said, "thinking about how far we have come." "We have come very far." Prudence turned in his arms to face him. "Do you know what today is, our anniversary?" "Yes, but it is also 17 years to the day since Thomas died," she said quietly. "I was thinking about that earlier. 17 years. It feels like a lifetime ago and also like yesterday all at once." Lucas nodded, understanding. "Do you want to visit his grave tomorrow?" "I think I would like that," Prudence said. "It has been too long." The next day they made the trip to Fort Gibson. The cemetery had grown over the years with many new graves added, but Prudence knew exactly where Thomas's plot was. She walked to it without hesitation, Lucas beside her as always. The oak cross was still there, weathered but standing strong. Prudence knelt and cleared away the weeds that had grown up around it. "Hello, Thomas," she said softly. "I am sorry it has been so long since I visited. Life has been very busy, but that is a good thing. I wanted to tell you that I am happy, truly, deeply happy. Lucas and I have built a wonderful life together. We have 3 amazing children, a successful ranch, and more love than I ever thought possible." She paused, her hand resting on the grave. "I still think about you sometimes. I still remember the good years we had together. You were my first love and you will always be special to me, but I also want you to know that I have moved on. I have found peace and joy again, and I hope, that wherever you are happy about that." Lucas placed his hand on her shoulder, a comforting presence. Prudence stood and turned to him, smiling through her tears. "Ready to go home?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said. "Let us go home." They walked back to the wagon hand in hand, and as they drove away from Fort Gibson, Prudence felt a sense of closure she had not known she needed. Thomas would always be a part of her past, but he was the past. Her present and her future were with Lucas and their children on their ranch, living the life they had built together. The seasons turned once more. Winter came and went, followed by spring and summer. In the fall of 1892, young Thomas announced that he was courting a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sweet young woman named Sarah who clearly adored him. Prudence watched her son fall in love and remembered her own youth, her own first experiences with romance. The following spring, Thomas and Sarah were married in the same church where Lucas and Prudence had wed. Prudence cried happy tears as she watched her eldest son promise to love and cherish his bride, as she saw the way he looked at Sarah with such devotion. "We are getting old," she whispered to Lucas as they watched the young couple dance at their wedding reception. Lucas chuckled. "Speak for yourself. I still feel like a young man." Prudence elbowed him gently. "You are 42 years old, and you are 41. We are in our prime, not old." "Our son is married, Lucas. We are old enough to be grandparents soon." Lucas's eyes widened. Grandparents. Good Lord, that does make us sound old. But they both smiled, recognizing it for what it was. A new chapter, a continuation of the family they had built. And indeed, less than a year later, young Thomas and Sarah announced they were expecting a child. Prudence found herself preparing to be a grandmother, sewing tiny clothes and knitting small blankets, feeling the circle of life continuing. The baby, a boy they named William, was born in the spring of 1894. Prudence held her grandson for the first time and felt her heart overflow with love and gratitude. This child was the future, a continuation of everything she and Lucas had built together. Rose was 16 now, beautiful and talented, with several young men vying for her attention. Henry was 12, still helping with ranch work and showing signs of becoming as capable as his older brother. Life continued its steady rhythm. The ranch prospered. The family grew. There were hard times, of course. A drought in 1895 that tested everyone's resolve. A harsh winter in 1897 that took some of their cattle. But they weathered every challenge together, their love and commitment to each other never wavering. In the summer of 1900, as the new century began, Prudence and Lucas celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. It was a grand celebration, with friends and family coming from all over to help them mark the occasion. Young Thomas and Sarah were there with their 3 children now. Rose was married to a banker from Fort Gibson and expecting her first child. Henry, at 18, was managing much of the ranch operation, showing the same steady competence as his father. As Prudence looked around at all the people who had gathered, at the life they had built, she felt profound gratitude. She thought briefly of that broken woman she had been 25 years ago, kneeling at a grave every day, convinced her life was over, how wrong she had been. Her life had not been over. It had been transformed, renewed, made richer and fuller than she could have ever imagined. That evening, as the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Lucas took Prudence's hand and led her away from the crowd, up to a small rise that overlooked their land. 25 years, he said, his voice full of wonder. A quarter of a century. It has gone by so fast, Prudence said. Sometimes I feel like we just got married yesterday, and other times I feel like I have known you my whole life. Lucas pulled her close. I need you to know something, Prudence. These past 25 years with you have been the greatest blessing of my life. You made me a husband, a father, a better man than I ever would have been on my own. I love you with everything I am. Prudence looked up at him, at the gray now threading through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling and squinting into the sun. He was still the handsomest man she had ever known. I love you too, she said. You saved my life, Lucas. I truly believe that. I was drowning in grief, and you threw me a lifeline. You showed me that it was possible to love again, to be happy again. Everything good in my life came from that moment when you joined me at Thomas's grave and told me I was not alone anymore. Lucas kissed her, long and sweet and full of the love they had shared for 25 years. When they finally pulled apart, they stood together watching the sun set over their land, over the life they had built together. As the years continued to pass, Prudence and Lucas grew old together, but they grew old happily, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch that had started as just 60 acres, and a dream had grown into a substantial operation that provided well for their entire extended family. In 1910, at the age of 59, Prudence became a great-grandmother when her granddaughter gave birth to a little girl. Holding that tiny infant, looking at her wrinkled little face, Prudence marveled at the continuity of life, at how love and family persisted across generations. Lucas was 61 now, still active on the ranch, though he had turned over most of the daily operations to Henry. They spent their days working in the garden, reading together, taking long walks across their land, and doting on their ever-growing family. One autumn day in 1912, they made a trip into Fort Gibson. It had been years since Prudence had visited Thomas's grave, and she felt the pull to return one more time. The cemetery had expanded significantly over the decades. There were hundreds of graves now, where once there had been just dozens. But Prudence still remembered exactly where Thomas's plot was located. She was shocked when they reached it. The beautiful oak cross Lucas had carved so long ago had finally succumbed to time and weather. It lay on the ground, the wood rotted through, the carved letters barely visible. "Oh," Prudence said softly, kneeling beside the fallen cross. "I had no idea." Lucas crouched beside her. "I am sorry, Prudence, I should have checked on it." "No, it is all right." She touched the rotted wood gently. "It lasted almost 40 years. That is remarkable, really." "I will make a new one," Lucas offered. "A stone marker this time, something that will last." Prudence looked at him, at her husband of 37 years, and smiled. "That would be nice. But Lucas, you do not have to do it for me. I think it is time I stop visiting this grave." Lucas looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." Prudence stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Thomas has been gone for 37 years. I have visited his grave faithfully for all that time, but I think it is time to let go fully. He will always be in my heart, but I do not need to come here anymore." She looked around the cemetery, at all the graves of people who had lived and died, who had loved and lost, who had contributed their small piece to the great tapestry of human existence. "We all have our time," she said softly. "Thomas had his, and it was too short, but I have had mine, and it has been long and full and so good. Because of you, Lucas, because you joined me at this grave 37 years ago and told me I was not alone." Lucas took her hand and squeezed it. "You made my life worth living, Prudence. Every single day with you has been a gift." They stood together in the cemetery for a few more minutes, saying a final goodbye to Thomas. Then they turned and walked away, two people who had found each other in the depths of grief and had built a life of love and meaning together. As they drove home, past fields turning golden in the autumn sun, past the ranch that had been their life's work, Prudence felt at peace. She had lived through incredible loss and had found her way to incredible joy. She had loved 2 good men, had raised 3 wonderful children, and had been blessed with grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would carry on the family legacy. That evening, sitting on their porch as the sun set in shades of orange and pink, Lucas asked, "Do you have any regrets?" Prudence thought about it carefully, then shook her head. "No, not really. I wish Thomas had not died so young, but I cannot regret what came after. I cannot regret you or our children or the life we have built, and I think Thomas would not want me to regret it either." "I think you are right," Lucas agreed. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, listening to his steady heartbeat. "We have had a good life," she said softly. "The best life," Lucas corrected. "And it is not over yet. We still have years ahead of us, years to enjoy our family and watch it continue to grow." And they did have more years together. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1915, surrounded by their enormous extended family. They continued to work their ranch, though at a slower pace now. They traveled a bit, visiting relatives in other states, seeing parts of the country they had only heard about. In 1918, at the age of 67, Prudence published a small book of poetry she had been writing over the years. They were poems about love and loss, about grief and healing, about the resilience of the human spirit. The book did not sell many copies, but the ones it did sell touched people deeply. Prudence received letters from readers thanking her for putting into words what they had felt but could not express. Lucas was immensely proud of her accomplishment. He bought every copy he could find and gave them to family and friends, telling anyone who would listen about his talented wife. As they entered their 70s, Lucas and Prudence slowed down considerably, but they were still sharp mentally and full of love for each other and their family. They spent their days in comfortable companionship, often not needing words, so well did they know each other after nearly 50 years of marriage. On a warm spring morning in 1925, Prudence woke to find Lucas still asleep beside her. She smiled and reached out to touch his face, marveling that they were still together after all these years. "Good morning," she whispered. Lucas's eyes opened slowly and he smiled at her. "Good morning, my love." They lay there together, holding hands, watching the morning light filter through their bedroom curtains. Prudence felt overwhelmingly grateful for every moment they had shared, for every laugh and every tear, for every challenge overcome and every joy celebrated. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Lucas replied. "Forever and always." And that love sustained them through their final years together. When Lucas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1928 at the age of 79, Prudence grieved deeply. But it was a different kind of grief than she had experienced with Thomas. This grief was softened by the knowledge that she and Lucas had lived a full, complete life together. They had loved deeply, raised a family, built something lasting. There were no regrets, no what-ifs, no time stolen. Prudence lived another 5 years after Lucas's death, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She spent her time writing more poetry, tending her garden, and telling stories about Lucas to anyone who would listen. She wanted everyone to know what a remarkable man he had been, how he had saved her life and given her everything. On a quiet autumn morning in 1933, Prudence Reynolds Jameson passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. She was buried beside Lucas on their ranch, in a small family cemetery they had established years before. The headstone read, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, she loved deeply and was deeply loved." At her funeral, her children and grandchildren shared stories about her strength, her kindness, and her unwavering love for her family. They talked about how she had overcome tremendous loss and had built a beautiful life. They spoke of how she and Lucas had been an example of what true, lasting love looked like, and in the end, that was Prudence's legacy. Not just the ranch or the family she had helped create, but the testament to the human capacity for healing and renewal. She had shown everyone who knew her that it was possible to survive devastating loss, to find love again, to build a new life even when the old one had been shattered. Years later, her great-great-grandchildren would read her poetry and hear stories about the woman who had lost her first husband young, had mourned him faithfully, and had then found love again with a cowboy who had joined her at a grave and told her she was not alone anymore. They would learn about resilience and hope, about the power of love to heal and transform. And they would understand that Prudence and Lucas's love story was not just about romance, though it was certainly romantic. It was about the courage to keep living when life seemed unbearable, about choosing hope over despair, about opening your heart to love even after it had been broken. In the small family cemetery on what had once been the Jameson Ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the final resting place of Prudence and Lucas. And on warm summer days, when the wind whispered through the prairie grass and wildflowers bloomed around the graves, it almost seemed like you could feel their love still, enduring beyond death. a testament to the power of two hearts that had found each other in the darkest moment and had chosen to walk through life together, hand in hand, forever.